In September 2016, the small town of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, basked in the warm glow of late summer sunlight. The air carried the faint scent of salt from the nearby Gulf of Mexico, mingling with the sweet aroma of magnolias that lined the quiet streets. Zarina Claiborne, a 29-year-old music teacher at the local high school, moved through her days with a nervous anticipation that quickened her pulse. Her life, once a predictable rhythm of lesson plans and solitary evenings, had shifted into a brighter key since she met Darius Velmore. Her wedding, now just days away, promised to anchor her in a future she had long stopped imagining for herself. Zarina had grown up in Ocean Springs, her childhood shaped by the town's slow pace and the constant presence of the sea. Her parents, both teachers, had instilled in her a love for music, but their early deaths, her mother to cancer when Zarina was 16, her father to a heart attack 3 years later, had left her untethered. She had thrown herself into her studies, earning a degree in music education, and returned to Ocean Springs to teach. Her days were filled with the chatter of teenagers and the strains of violins and pianos. But her nights were quiet, spent in a small apartment cluttered with sheet music and half-read novels. Friendships had faded over time, and romantic relationships, when they happened, crumbled under the weight of her guarded heart. By her late 20s, Zarina had grown accustomed to loneliness, wearing it like a familiar coat. Darius Velmore arrived in Ocean Springs 3 years prior, a new doctor at the town's only clinic. At 32, he carried an air of quiet confidence that drew people to him. His voice, low and steady, put patients at ease, and his hands moved with a precision that spoke of years of training. He had come from a larger city, Atlanta, he said briefly when asked about his past, and settled into Ocean Springs with an ease that suggested he belonged. The townsfolk admired his dedication, noting how he lingered with patients, listening to their concerns long after appointments were meant to end. His dark eyes, framed by thick lashes, held a warmth that made people feel seen, and his smile, though rare, was disarming. To Zarina, he was a revelation. They met by chance at a community fundraiser, a summer barbecue held on the lawn of the town hall. Zarina, roped into playing the piano for the event, had been coaxing a worn upright into tune when Darius approached. He had been watching her from across the lawn, struck by the way her fingers danced over the keys, her expression softening as the music flowed. Their conversation began haltingly, centered on the humid weather and the quality of the barbecue, but it stretched into the evening. By the time the fireflies appeared, Zarina felt a spark she hadn't known in years. Darius, too, seemed drawn to her, his usual reserve giving way to a quiet intensity. They parted with a promise to meet again, and within weeks their encounters became a rhythm of their own. Coffee at the local diner, walks along the beach, evenings spent listening to jazz records in Zarina's apartment. Over the next 2 years, their relationship deepened. Darius was patient, never pushing Zarina to share more than she was ready to give, and she, in turn, found herself opening up, revealing the ache of her parents' loss and the dreams she had tucked away. He spoke little of his own past, mentioning only a distant family and a childhood spent moving between cities. Zarina didn't press him. His presence was enough, a steady anchor in her unsteady world. When he proposed on a quiet evening under the stars by the Gulf, she accepted without hesitation, her heart swelling with a joy that felt almost foreign. The silver bracelet he gave her that night, engraved with their initials, became her talisman, a tangible promise of their future. The wedding took place on a Saturday, the beach stretching golden and endless under a cloudless sky. Zarina had chosen a dress of ivory silk, its simple lines accentuating her slender frame. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a practical bun, fell in loose waves, catching the sunlight. The silver bracelet gleamed on her wrist, its delicate chain a constant reminder of Darius's love. The ceremony was small, attended by a handful of colleagues, neighbors, and a few of Zarina's students who had begged to come. Darius stood tall in a black suit, his posture straight, but his hands restless, fingers twitching slightly as he waited for Zarina to walk down the aisle. His face broke into a smile as she approached, but his eyes flickered briefly to the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a haze of blue. The reception unfolded on the shore, a tent strung with fairy lights casting a soft glow over the guests. A local saxophonist played smooth, soulful melodies, and the sound of laughter mingled with the gentle crash of waves. Zarina moved through the crowd, her smile radiant, her hand often reaching for Darius's. He was gracious, thanking guests and sharing brief stories, but there were moments when his gaze grew distant, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Zarina, caught in the whirlwind of the day, noticed nothing amiss. She danced with her students, laughed with her fellow teachers, and stole glances at her new husband, her heart full. The silver bracelet caught the light as she moved, its shine a quiet echo of her happiness. As the evening wound down, the couple retreated to their new home, a modest house nestled among pine trees a mile from the shore. The house was a gift from Darius's savings, a surprise he had revealed months earlier. Its white clapboard exterior and wraparound porch charmed Zarina, who had already begun imagining a life there. Mornings spent drinking coffee on the porch, evenings filled with music and conversation. Inside, the rooms were sparsely furnished, the walls bare but for a few framed prints Zarina had hung. The bedroom, with its wide windows and view of the pines, felt like a sanctuary. That night, Zarina sat at the vanity, brushing her hair, the candlelight casting soft shadows across the room. The silver bracelet lay heavy on her wrist, its weight grounding her in the moment. Darius entered the room, his suit jacket discarded, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His movements were slow, almost hesitant, as he crossed the threshold. Zarina turned to him, her smile warm, expecting the closeness they had built over months of stolen moments. But his face was taut, his eyes avoiding hers. He paused by the bed, his hands clenching briefly before relaxing. Zarina, still caught in the glow of the day, rose to meet him, her fingers brushing his arm. The air between them thickened, charged with something unspoken. Darius took a step back, his breath uneven, and Zarina's smile faltered. The candle flickered, casting his shadow long and jagged across the wall. In that moment, the promise of their new life seemed to waver, a fragile note held too long before breaking. The bedroom, bathed in the soft flicker of candlelight, seemed to hold its breath as Zarina stood frozen, her fingers still brushing Darius's arm. The warmth of the wedding day lingered in her chest, a fragile ember she longed to stoke into something deeper now that they were alone. The pine-scented air drifted through the open window, carrying the distant murmur of the Gulf. But the intimacy Zarina had envisioned for their first night as husband and wife felt elusive. Darius's hesitation, his step back from her touch, cast a shadow over the moment. His eyes, usually so steady, darted away, and his shoulders tensed as if bracing for a blow. Zarina's hand fell to her side, the silver bracelet on her wrist catching the light, its weight suddenly heavier than before. Darius moved toward the bed, his fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt. The candle's glow illuminated his silhouette, and Zarina, still standing near the vanity, watched him with a mix of anticipation and unease. As he shrugged the shirt from his shoulders, the fabric parted to reveal his chest, and Zarina's breath caught. Thin, pale scars crisscrossed his skin, faint but unmistakable, like the delicate lines of a surgeon's blade. They arched across his pectorals, precise and symmetrical, their edges softened by time but still stark against his smooth skin. Zarina's brow furrowed, her mind grasping for an explanation, perhaps an accident, a medical procedure. But the sight unsettled her, a discordant note in the melody of their evening. She opened her mouth to ask, but the words dissolved as Darius turned to face her, his expression raw, almost pleading. He sank to his knees, the movement slow and deliberate, as if the weight of his body could no longer bear what he carried inside. His hands rested on his thighs, fingers curling tightly, and his gaze fixed on the floorboards. The room grew oppressively still, the only sound the faint crackle of the candle's wick. Zarina stood rooted, her heart pounding, sensing that whatever came next would unravel the fragile joy of the day. Darius's chest rose and fell with a shuddering breath, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy, reflecting the candle's flame. In that moment, he seemed both achingly familiar and utterly foreign, a man stripped of the quiet confidence that had drawn her to him. Zarina's mind reeled as Darius's confession unfolded, though she could not yet grasp its full weight. He had been born a woman, he said, his voice trembling but steady, as if he had rehearsed the words countless times. Years ago, he had embarked on a journey of surgeries and hormone treatments, reshaping his body to align with the man he had always known himself to be. He had buried his past, he explained, terrified that revealing it would cost him Zarina's love. Every step of their relationship, every coffee shared, every walk along the beach, every quiet night in her apartment, had been shadowed by this secret, a truth he had guarded to protect the future he dreamed of with her. His love, he insisted, was real, untainted by the omission, and he had hoped their marriage would be a new beginning, free of the ghosts of who he had been. The words crashed over Zarina like a wave, pulling her under. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow, as her mind scrambled to reconcile the man before her with the truth he had just laid bare. The Darius she knew, his steady hands, his gentle smile, the way he listened to her fears, seemed to fracture, replaced by a stranger whose past she could not comprehend. Betrayal surged within her, sharp and bitter, not because of who he was, but because he had hidden it, weaving a lie into the fabric of their love. Fear followed, a primal unease that coiled in her gut, whispering questions she was ashamed to entertain. Her body recoiled, her feet carrying her backward until her back pressed against the cool plaster of the wall, the edge of the vanity digging into her hip. The mirror on the wall, an heirloom from her grandmother's house, loomed behind her, its ornate frame glinting in the candlelight. Its surface, slightly warped with age, reflected Zarina's distorted silhouette, her face pale and eyes wide. Her gaze darted to the vanity, where a pair of scissors rested among her hairbrush in a scattering of hairpins. The scissors were small, their handles worn from years of cutting ribbons for her students' music recitals, but their blades gleamed sharply in the dim light. Her hand twitched, drawn to them, though she didn't yet know why. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with the weight of Darius's confession and her own spiraling emotions. Darius rose, his movements unsteady, and took a step toward her. His hands were open, palms up, as if to show he meant no harm, but his approach felt like an invasion. Zarina's heart raced, her thoughts a chaotic blur of anger, hurt, and a visceral repulsion she could neither name nor suppress. The man she had married, the man she had trusted, seemed to dissolve before her, leaving only this truth she could not bear. Her fingers closed around the scissors, their cold metal grounding her in the storm of her emotions. Darius's eyes widened, his step faltering, but he continued forward, his expression desperate, as if he could bridge the chasm between them with sheer will. Zarina's vision narrowed, the room fading until only Darius remained, his scars a stark reminder of the secret he had kept. Her anger flared, white-hot, drowning out the love she had felt hours earlier. She lunged, the scissors flashing in her hand, and drove them into his chest. The blades sank with sickening ease, piercing skin and muscle, and a gasp escaped Darius's lips, sharp and fleeting. Blood bloomed across his chest, dark and spreading, soaking the floorboards in a warm, viscous pool. He staggered, his hands grasping at the air, and then collapsed, his body crumpling like a marionette with cut strings. His eyes, wide with shock, met hers for a fleeting moment before they dulled, the light within them extinguished. Zarina stood trembling, the scissors still clutched in her hand, their blades slick with blood. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her mind struggling to catch up with her body's actions. The candle flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows across the room, and the mirror reflected her distorted image, her face a mask of horror. The reality of what she had done crashed over her, heavy and suffocating. She hadn't meant to kill him. The anger, the betrayal had moved her hand, but now Darius lay still, his blood pooling beneath him, and there was no undoing it. The silver bracelet on her wrist glinted, a cruel reminder of the vows they had exchanged hours before, now broken in a way she could never have imagined. Zarina remained in the bedroom until dawn, her body slumped against the wall, her eyes fixed on Darius's lifeless form. The blood on the floor had darkened, congealing into a sticky pool that glistened faintly in the dying candlelight. Her mind, numb with shock, refused to process the reality before her, but her body moved with a mechanical precision, driven by an instinct to erase what had happened. She rose, her legs unsteady, and approached the body, her breath shallow. The scissors, still lying where she had dropped them, glinted accusingly, but she averted her gaze. She knelt beside Darius, her hands trembling as she touched his cooling skin, and a wave of nausea surged through her. There was no time for grief or regret. Survival demanded action. She found a bedsheet in the linen closet, its crisp white fabric a stark contrast to the task at hand. Spreading it on the floor, she rolled Darius's body onto it, wincing at the weight and the unnatural stillness. The sheet soaked up the blood, turning crimson at the edges, and she wrapped it tightly, securing it with a length of twine from the kitchen. Her movements were methodical, her mind detached, as if she were watching herself from a distance. Dragging the bundle across the hardwood floor, she left faint smears of blood, which she would deal with later. The garage, accessible through a side door, was dim and cool, smelling of motor oil and pine. She opened the trunk of her car, a modest sedan parked inside, and heaved the body into it, the thud echoing in the silence. Her arms ached and sweat beaded on her forehead, but she felt nothing beyond the need to keep moving. The pre-dawn sky was a deep indigo, streaked with the first hints of gray, as Zarina drove toward the pine grove near the bay. The road was empty, the town still asleep, and the hum of the engine filled the void left by her thoughts. The grove, a place she and Darius had visited once during a rare carefree afternoon, was tucked away from Ditto and a half-mile from the Gulf. Its tall pines stood sentinel over a carpet of needles, their roots twisting through sandy soil. She parked near a narrow trail, the air heavy with the scent of salt and resin. Stepping out, she retrieved a shovel from the trunk, a tool Darius had used for gardening, and began to dig among the trees. The earth was soft, yielding easily, but the work was grueling. Her hands blistered and her back ached, but she pressed on, carving out a shallow grave. The smell of the bay mingled with the pine, a bittersweet reminder of the walks she and Darius had taken here, their hands entwined. When the hole was deep enough, she dragged the body from the car and pushed it in, covering it with earth until the ground looked undisturbed. She scattered needles over the site, blending it with the forest floor, and stood for a moment, her breath ragged, before returning to the car. Back at the house, Zarina scrubbed the bedroom floor with bleach, the sharp chemical smell burning her nostrils. The bloodstains faded, though faint traces lingered in the grain of the wood, invisible to anyone but her. She gathered the scissors, their blades crusted with dried blood, and drove to the shore, where she hurled them into the Gulf. The waves swallowed them without a trace, their surface unbroken under the rising sun. In the backyard, she burned the bloodied sheet in a metal trash can, watching the flames consume it until only ash remained. She scattered the ashes among the pines behind the house, her hands trembling as she worked. To explain Darius's absence, she crafted a story. He had left for a medical conference in New Orleans and failed to return. She rehearsed it in her mind, perfecting the tremble in her voice, the worried furrow of her brow. A week later, she called the police, her performance convincing. Detective Quentin Laroche, a man with sharp eyes and a weathered face, arrived at her door. His questions were pointed. When had she last seen Darius? Had he seemed troubled? Did he have enemies? But Zarina answered with practiced calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The detective's gaze lingered on her, searching for cracks in her composure. But he found none. He took notes, promised to follow up, and left, his footsteps heavy on the porch. The investigation opened but stalled quickly. Without a body or evidence, there was little to pursue. The case file gathered dust and Ocean Springs moved on, its rhythm undisturbed. Zarina returned to teaching, standing before her students with a forced smile. The music room, once her sanctuary, felt hollow, the notes of her piano lessons flat and lifeless. Her students, oblivious to her inner turmoil, played their scales, but she struggled to focus, her mind drifting to the pine grove. The silver bracelet, once a cherished symbol of her love, now burned against her skin. She removed it, tucking it into a drawer beneath a pile of scarves, unable to bear its weight. Her days passed in a haze, her movements automatic, grading papers, preparing lessons, nodding at colleagues' small talk. But her nights were restless, plagued by the creak of floorboards and the whisper of footsteps in the empty house. She checked the locks, peered into dark corners, but found only silence. The bedroom mirror, its aged glass reflecting her pale face, became a source of unease. At times, as she brushed her hair or adjusted her blouse, she glimpsed a shadow in its depths. Not her own reflection, but something else, fleeting and formless. She blinked and it vanished, leaving her heart racing. She told herself it was exhaustion, the weight of her guilt playing tricks, but the sensation lingered, a quiet menace in the stillness of her home. The pines outside her window swayed in the wind, their branches casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. And Zarina wondered if the grove, too, was watching, holding her secret close. 18 months had passed since the night that shattered Zarina's world, and she had learned to bury her guilt beneath a veneer of routine. Teaching, grading, smiling at her students. Each act was a deliberate step to distance herself from the memory of Darius's blood on her hands, yet the bedroom mirror, with its warped glass and heavy frame, refused to let her forget. Each glance into its depths brought a flicker of that night, her own reflection haunted by the ghost of her actions. She avoided the clinic where Darius had worked, steering clear of his former colleagues whose polite inquiries felt like accusations. The silver bracelet remained hidden in her drawer, untouched, its presence a silent weight she could neither confront nor discard. Despite her efforts to move forward, an unshakable sense of being watched clung to her, a shadow that lingered at the edges of her perception. One crisp morning in early spring, Zarina stepped onto her porch to retrieve the mail, the air sharp with the scent of pine and sea. Among the bills and flyers in her mailbox was an unmarked envelope, its plain white surface unmarred by stamps or addresses. Her fingers hesitated before tearing it open, and a small cascade of fine pale sand spilled onto her palm, its texture identical to the grains that lined the Gulf shore. Tucked inside was a folded slip of paper, its message scrawled in sharp, uneven letters. "I know what you hid among the pines. Confess, or I will find you." Her breath caught, and the world seemed to tilt. The sand slipped through her fingers, scattering across the porch, its faint, salty scent rising like a memory of the grove where she had buried her secret. Her hands shook as she read the note again, the words searing into her mind. Inside the house, Zarina lit a match and held the note over the kitchen sink, watching the paper curl and blacken until it was ash. The sand, however, proved harder to erase. It clung to her skin, dusted the floor, and carried a persistent smell that haunted her even after she swept it away. She vacuumed the porch, scrubbed her hands, but the sensation of those grains lingered, a tactile reminder of the threat now looming over her. Her days, once structured by the monotony of teaching, became punctuated by unease. At school, she began to notice oddities that set her nerves on edge. A bouquet of wildflowers, daisies and clover, the kind she had once picked for Darius during their walks, appeared on her desk in the music room, tied with a ribbon but lacking a note. She questioned her students, her voice sharper than intended, but none claimed responsibility. The flowers sat there, their petals wilting until she threw them out, her hands trembling. The mirror in her bedroom, already a source of dread, grew more unsettling. One evening, as she prepared for bed, she noticed a hairline crack snaking across its surface, radiating from the center like a spider's web. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even brushed against it, yet the fracture was undeniable. The sight sent a chill through her, and she covered the mirror with a sheet, unwilling to meet her own gaze. Determined to rid herself of its presence, she purchased a new mirror, a simple rectangular one with a plain frame, and hung it in the same spot. The next morning, she woke to find it cracked in the same pattern, the glass splintered as if struck by an unseen force. Her heart pounded as she tore it down, shoving it into the garage with the sheet-draped original, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Desperate for answers, Zarina contacted Detective Quentin LaRoche, fabricating a story about receiving vague threats. She met him at her home, her demeanor carefully composed as she showed him the mailbox and described the envelope, omitting the note's contents and the sand. LaRoche, his eyes as piercing as ever, walked through her house, checking windows and doors for signs of tampering. He found nothing. No footprints, no forced locks, no evidence of an intruder. Standing in her living room, he studied her, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. His voice was measured as he suggested she see a counselor, citing stress as a possible cause for her unease. Zarina nodded, her smile tight. But inside she recoiled. Trusting anyone with the truth was unthinkable. The weight of her secret was hers alone to bear. Alone again, Zarina's thoughts turned to Darius, her suspicion growing that he had concealed more than she realized. She ventured into his study, a small room at the back of the house she had rarely entered. The space was tidy, its desk bare except for a few medical journals and a framed photo of the two of them on the beach. She rifled through drawers, finding only pens, notepads, and a stethoscope, until her fingers brushed against a small wooden box tucked beneath a stack of files. Inside was an old flip phone, its screen scratched and its battery long dead. Her pulse quickened as she plugged it into a charger, waiting for it to power on. The device was locked, but after several guesses, she entered Darius's birth date, and the screen unlocked, revealing a sparse interface with a single text thread. The messages were from someone named Imani Talbert, a name Zarina didn't recognize. The tone was intimate, familial, with Imani addressing Darius as sister in several exchanges. The conversation spanned years, referencing shared memories in Darius's transition, confirming that Imani knew his past in a way Zarina never had. One message, sent months before the wedding, stood out. "You have to tell her. She deserves to know who you are." Zarina's stomach churned, the words a confirmation of her betrayal and a clue to the threat now closing in. She clutched the phone, her mind racing. Imani, whoever she was, held pieces of Darius's life that Zarina had been denied, and the sand in the envelope suggested she might know more, perhaps even the truth buried among the pines. Zarina's resolve hardened as she clutched the old flip phone, its screen still glowing with Imani's messages. The name, Imani Talbert, burned in her mind, a tether to the truth she both feared and needed to confront. She spent the night scouring public records online, her fingers trembling as she typed. By morning she had an address, a modest house in Biloxi, an hour's drive from Ocean Springs. Imani was a nurse, employed at a local hospital and lived alone by the sea. Zarina's heart pounded as she prepared to face her, unsure whether she sought answers or absolution. She slipped the phone into her purse, grabbed her car keys, and drove east, the Gulf's horizon stretching wide and unyielding to her left. The road to Biloxi wound through salt marshes and low dunes, the air thick with the briny tang of the coast. Zarina's sedan hummed along, its tires kicking up faint clouds of dust as she neared the city. Her thoughts churned, replaying the messages, the sand, the cracked mirrors. Imani's knowledge of Darius's past and her cryptic threats suggested she was no stranger to suspicion. Zarina's guilt, a constant weight, mingled with a flicker of defiance. She hadn't asked for Darius's deception, hadn't chosen the path that led to his death. Yet the pine grove loomed in her memory, its earth holding her secret, and Imani's pursuit threatened to unearth it. The drive felt endless, each mile tightening the knot in her chest. Imani's house stood at the edge of a quiet street, its weathered clapboards siding bleached by sun and salt. A small porch faced the Gulf, its railing adorned with a single potted plant, its leaves wilting in the heat. Zarina parked across the street, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she studied the house. The windows were dark, the curtains still, but a faint glow from within suggested someone was home. She stepped out, the sea breeze tugging at her hair, and crossed the street, her footsteps heavy on the cracked pavement. Her knock on the door was tentative at first, then firmer, the sound echoing in the stillness. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman whose face stopped Zarina's breath. Imani Talbert was striking, her features a haunting echo of Darius's, high cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes that held the same depth, though hers were shadowed with fatigue. Her hair was cropped short, framing a face that bore the weariness of someone who had carried too much for too long. She wore a simple cotton dress, its hem frayed, and stood with a quiet confidence that unnerved Zarina. Manny's gaze flickered over her, assessing, but she showed no surprise, as if she had been expecting this visit. She stepped aside, gesturing for Zarina to enter, and closed the door behind them, the click of the latch loud in the silent house. The living room was sparse, its furniture worn but clean, with a single couch facing a window that framed the sea. A small table held a stack of medical journals and a framed photo of a younger Imani beside a person with long hair. their face obscured by a smudge on the glass. Zarina's pulse quickened, sensing it was Darius before his transition, but she averted her eyes, focusing on Imani, who sat across from her, hands folded in her lap. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the weight of their shared connection to Darius pressing against the walls. Imani's expression was unreadable, but her eyes never left Zarina, searching for something beneath her carefully composed exterior. Imani began to speak, her voice low and steady, unraveling the story of her bond with Darius. She was his cousin, raised alongside him in a small Georgia town, where their families shared Sunday dinners and summer evenings. When Darius confided in her about his gender dysphoria, Imani had been his confidant, supporting him through years of doubt and fear. She had stood by him during his surgeries, visited him in recovery, and celebrated his decision to start anew in Ocean Springs, where no one knew his past. Darius had dreamed of a life unburdened by judgment, she explained, a life where he could love and be loved as himself. When he met Zarina, his letters to Imani brimmed with hope, describing her warmth, her music, her quiet strength. But his fear of rejection kept him silent, convincing him to bury his truth to protect their love. After Darius vanished, Imani's grief turned to suspicion. His silence was unnatural. He had always checked in, even during busy weeks at the clinic. She traveled to Ocean Springs, asking discreet questions at the clinic and among neighbors, but found no answers. Zarina's story about the conference in New Orleans felt rehearsed, too tidy. Imani began watching her, tracking her movements from a distance, noting the strain in her eyes, the way she avoided certain places. On a whim, she collected sand from the shore where she and Darius had once walked, a place he had loved, and sent it in an envelope with a note, testing Zarina's reaction. The absence of a public response only deepened Imani's certainty that Zarina was hiding something, though she lacked proof. Zarina sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap, as Imani's words washed over her. Guilt surged, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her, but it was laced with a bitter anger, not at Imani, but at Darius for leaving her to carry this alone. She wanted to lash out, to blame Imani for stirring the past, for sending the sand that haunted her days. But as Imani spoke, her voice steady with love and loss, Zarina felt only emptiness, a hollow space where her defenses had been. She remained silent, her face a mask, but her eyes betrayed her, glistening with the weight of her secret. Imani's gaze softened, as if she saw the truth in that moment, but she said nothing, letting the silence stretch between them. Zarina left the house without a word, her steps unsteady as she crossed the porch and returned to her car. The sea stretched endless before her, its waves indifferent to the storm within. She drove back to Ocean Springs, her mind a tangle of Imani's revelations and her own unraveling composure. Behind her, Imani stood on the porch, her silhouette framed against the gulf. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a worn photograph she hadn't shown Zarina. A young Darius, his hair long and his smile shy, taken before he became the man Zarina had loved. Imani's fingers traced the image, her resolve hardening. She had seen the guilt in Zarina's eyes, the crack in her facade, and knew the truth was close. She vowed to see it through, to honor Darius's memory by uncovering what lay hidden among the pines. Zarina's drive back from Biloxi left her drained, the weight of Imani's gaze and the echo of her words pressing against her chest. The Gulf's waves had offered no solace, their rhythm a reminder of the secrets she could no longer outrun. When she reached her house in Ocean Springs, the familiar pine trees loomed like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching across the porch. As she approached the mailbox, her heart sank. Another unmarked envelope waited inside, its edges creased from the weight of its contents. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, and a small pile of fine, pale sand spilled onto the ground, accompanied by a jagged shard of glass. She held the fragment up, its surface reflecting her face, distorted by fear and exhaustion. Tucked inside the envelope was a note, its words stark and final. I saw the pines. I know. The sand's salty scent rose, mingling with the pine air, and Zarina knew Imani's pursuit had reached its endgame. Her pulse raced as she stepped inside, the envelope clutched in her hand. The note's certainty unnerved her, suggesting Imani had been to the grove, had stood where Darius lay hidden. Zarina's mind spiraled, questioning how much Imani truly knew. Had she seen the grave, disturbed the earth, found evidence? The shard of glass, sharp and glinting, felt like a piece of the cracked mirrors that had haunted her, a symbol of her fractured reality. She dropped it onto the kitchen counter, its edges catching the light, and paced the house, her thoughts a tangle of panic and resignation. The pine grove called to her, a need to confirm the grave's secrecy overpowering her fear. She grabbed her keys and drove, the road to the bay familiar yet alien under the weight of her dread. The grove was quiet, the pines swaying gently in the late afternoon breeze. Zarina parked near the trail, her footsteps muffled by the carpet of needles as she approached the spot. The earth appeared undisturbed, the soil and needles blending seamlessly with the surrounding ground. She knelt, her fingers brushing the surface, searching for signs of tampering, but found none. Relief flickered, only to vanish when her eyes caught a glint among the roots. There, half buried in the dirt, lay the silver bracelet, its delicate chain unmistakable. The initials she and Darius shared etched into its surface. Her breath caught. She had hidden it in a drawer, hadn't touched it since that night. Its presence here in the grove felt like a message, a confirmation that Imani had been closer than she imagined. Zarina snatched it up, its cold metal burning against her palm, and fled back to her car, the pines whispering behind her. At home, Zarina sat in the darkened living room, the bracelet and the mirror shard on the table before her. The weight of her actions, once buried like Darius in the grove, pressed down, suffocating her. She couldn't run from Imani's knowledge, couldn't erase the truth that had seeped into every corner of her life. An impulse, raw and unformed, drove her to her phone. She opened the camera, its lens a cold, unjudging eye, and began recording. The words came haltingly at first, her voice low and unsteady, as she recounted the night of the wedding, the shock of Darius's revelation, the scissors in her hand, the blood on the floor. She described the grove, the shovel, the earth that had swallowed her crime. Her confession poured out, not for redemption but for release, a need to unburden herself before the inevitable closed in. When she finished, her face was wet with tears she hadn't noticed falling. She found Imani's email in Darius's old phone and sent the video, her finger hesitating only a moment before pressing send. The next morning, a sharp knock shattered the silence of her home. Zarina opened the door to find Detective Quentin Laroche, his face grim, flanked by two uniformed officers. He held a warrant, his voice clipped as he informed her of her arrest. Imani had forwarded the video to the police, its contents undeniable. Zarina stood still, her hands extended as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. The officers led her to the patrol car, their movements efficient, but Zarina felt no urge to resist. Her face, pale and composed, held a strange calm, as if the act of confessing had lifted the weight she had carried for so long. As the car pulled away, she glanced back at the house, its windows dark, the pines beyond swaying in the wind. Imani stood alone on the shore near her Biloxi home, the gulf stretching vast and gray before her. In her hand was the silver bracelet, its surface worn but still gleaming, a relic of the cousin she had loved. The waves crashed, their rhythm a faint echo of the dreams she and Darius had shared in their youth. Dreams of freedom, of lives unjudged. Her pursuit of Zarina, driven by grief and a need for justice, had ended, but the victory was hollow. The bracelet felt heavy, its weight a reminder of the loss that had fueled her. She slipped a shard of mirror from her pocket, the same one she had sent Zarina, and gazed into it. For a moment she saw not her own reflection, but Darius, his smile before the surgeries, his pain hidden behind it. The image lingered, a ghost in the glass, and Imani's chest tightened. She had become a shadow of his memory, her life reshaped by the quest to honor him. And the cost had carved a void within her. In Ocean Springs, the pine grove stood unchanged, its trees whispering secrets to the wind. The police had come, their shovels breaking the earth to uncover Darius's remains, but the grove reclaimed its silence. The Gulf's waves rolled on, indifferent, carrying the town's stories into the vastness of time. The bracelet, the mirror, the sand, all traces of the truth Zarina had hidden and Imani had sought, faded into the rhythm of the sea, lost to the eternal tide.